Okay, so my talk is called Plundering Poor People with Populist Policies, and after I came up with the title, I realized that it was an alliteration. I hadn't planned on that, but it was a happy accident. And the point of this talk is to illustrate how many of the policies that we put in place that are presumably to help poor people end up sometimes harming them, without benefiting anyone else, but also sometimes plundering them, taking from the poor and giving to the, not necessarily the rich, but the non-poor. So some of the policies just do not help the poor and sometimes harm them, and some are transfers from poor people to less poor people. Right? And I call them these populist policies because in the normal discussion about how we should set up the economy to help poor people, these are very popular and almost untouchable policies that are just unquestioned as being helpful. And if you mention having to cut them or change them in any way, then you hate the poor. And the point here is that, well, in fact, you might love the poor more than I do, but you're harming them a lot more than I am. So let's just see which ones I'm going to talk about. So first, I want to just go through simple logic of poverty reduction. And let's just accept the premise that we want fewer poor people. And if there's some way that we can have some government policy to help poor people, then we might want to pursue that. Okay? So in order to have some effective policies to reach that end, we should know why people are poor and what it would look like if they were less poor. Okay, any problem with that? Okay, you're now way ahead of almost all policymakers if you agree with those statements. Because most policymakers, it's more about how they feel about how they're helping the poor, not how they're actually helping the poor. It's not necessarily important to know really why they're poor or how to get them out of it. It's that we're doing something. Okay. And I promise this, well, I can't actually promise it. I have fewer annoying, bouncy things than you might expect, given that the first one was one. But they're not all like that. All right, so just to set the framework here, the maximum amount that a person will be paid per hour, right? So the most that an employer will pay you to work is the marginal effect that the person will have on the revenue of his or her employer. Right? What that means is the person you work for will not pay you more than you're adding to profit or to revenue. Right? So if it costs you, if you working for that person means that that person will get $10 extra in revenue, then they will pay you up to $10, but no more, because that's what you're worth to them. Right? So your marginal revenue product is the effect that you have on your employer's revenue. All right? And your employer won't pay you more than that. Okay? All right, again, now you're getting into the top 95th percentile. Okay, under competitive labor markets, so employers are competing for your services, and you are looking around for employers who will maybe pay you the most. A person's wage, the wage you end up with, is approximately equal to your marginal revenue product, right? So you'll search around and match with the employer who you're giving the most benefit to, and then they'll pay you accordingly. And there are other employers that are competing for your services. So you'll be earning something like your marginal revenue product. Okay? Now, a person can increase his or her wage through education and or work experience. So you can get education or training to increase your productivity, meaning that now when you work an hour for your employer, you'll add more to revenue than before because you're more efficient and you'll produce more. So more can be sold, so now you can be more valuable to an employer. Right? So the way you can increase your marginal revenue product and therefore your wage is to get training or education. Or you can get work experience. When you're in a job, you learn more about how to do it, you get better at it, you learn new skills, so your productivity rises, so your wage will rise over time with work experience. Okay, pretty simple? Okay, so that's why I call it the simple logic of poverty reduction. All right, so what do we conclude from this? This is the second to last bouncy thing. Public policies that provide education and work experience for the poor will help them out of poverty and into economic self-sufficiency. Right? So if you're poor, meaning your wage when you go out to the market isn't that high, so you're below some measure of poverty, right? Then if we can increase your wage through education or work experience, that would be a way to help you out and make you not poor. All right? So if we wanted to reduce poverty, these are the public policies that we should look at. And also, the flip side of that is, if there are public policies that are doing the opposite of this, maybe we should stop doing them. Okay? Pretty simple. All right, so what are the policies I'm going to talk about? All right, so the primary anti-poverty policies at present, again, an accidental alliteration. So these are the most popular ones. The minimum wage, and there's a lot of discussion about raising the minimum wage from, what is it, $7.50 or something, up to over $10. Public education, right? We try to educate people so that they can become more productive and get higher wage. And the minimum wage is, well, if their wage is low, well, just pass a law, make their wage higher. That's easy. And then the welfare system, right? To try to help people out. They're poor, so we try to help them out so that they have enough to eat and so on. All right, so I'm going to go through these three main and very popular anti-poverty policies. And then we'll compare these policies to our simple logic, right? To see if these are doing what we expect anti-poverty policies to do if they're going to be successful, right? To increase the marginal revenue product of employees. All right, so let's look at the minimum wage, and I'll just summarize what the minimum wage means. Well, the minimum wage is you cannot pay anybody less than some amount. So if it's $7.50, right, you cannot legally employ someone and pay them less than $7.50. Okay, so who are the people who aren't going to be employed here? Well, in effect, this makes it illegal for you to hire someone whose productivity is such that they're only worth $5 to an employer. Right? So wages that people will get will depend on their productivity. So you are making it illegal to hire someone who has low productivity. Remember, no employer is going to hire someone for $7.50 if that person is only leading to $5 extra in revenue. Right? So all of those people who do not have the productivity to justify a $7.50 wage, it's illegal to, well, they won't be employed because it's illegal to pay them what they're worth in the market. Okay, so all of those people who are the poorest are the ones who will not be employed any longer. All right, so, well, in other words, their wage goes to zero. Right, so maybe someone was making $5 an hour, the minimum wage goes up to $7.50. That person's no longer working because they're not worth $7.50, so they now earn zero. Okay, well, that doesn't sound very good for the lowest skilled workers, right? So if you make it illegal to hire low skilled workers, then they're not going to be hired and they're going to be harmed. All right, so you might think, well, that's kind of a dumb idea. So why do we do this? Who is benefiting from it? And it turns out that not every worker is harmed by the minimum wage, right? Some benefit from it. Those who are still employed, some of them might see their wage rise a bit, right? If you were hired at the minimum wage, your wage might go up because the firm is going to adjust, maybe reduce output, and that'll increase your marginal productivity and so on. But there are other workers who are more skilled, who are going to be in higher demand. Right? If you make it illegal to hire the least skilled workers, then this will increase the demand for higher skilled workers. You know, not like doctors and lawyers, but kind of moderately skilled workers. So those people with some skills will be in higher demand, and their wages might go up because an employer still wants to produce. It's illegal to hire the lowest skilled workers, so they won't hire them, but they might hire more of the higher skilled workers to still try to keep producing some. So some workers will be benefiting by getting a higher wage. All right, so what we've done here is we've distorted the labor market such that the lowest skilled workers get their wage to fall to zero, but higher skilled workers get an increase in wage. Right, so this is the plundering the poorest people. Right, you make their wage go down to zero in order to make the wage for some other people go up. Okay, now there's another effect to this. It's not just right now you're going to be harming these people because they're not earning, you know, they don't have a high productivity, so they're not going to be hired. It's that now they may never be hired because they'll never get the opportunity to gain skills. Remember, there were two ways to increase your marginal revenue product and increase your wage. One is through education, and we're going to get to that. And the other is through experience. So if you're very poorly trained, you don't have much education or training, you can get a job without the minimum wage. You could get a job at a low wage temporarily and then earn experience, and then your wage will rise. Okay, that path to prosperity is now closed off to you because you can't get that first job. You can't get the experience. Right? So you can't climb that ladder to get yourself out of poverty. Right? Because that one route to prosperity is just made illegal because you can't be hired. Right? And then there's also this notion that, well, you know, you can't make a living on the minimum wage, or you can't raise a family of four when you're earning the minimum wage. And I suppose that's true, but there are actually very few people who are trying to raise a family of four on the minimum wage. The vast majority of people who earn the minimum wage at any time are teenagers who are in their first job and they're not very productive. So that's what they're paid. Older people are not, who are supporting families, are very, very rare in earning the minimum wage. So if you do increase the minimum wage, the people who might see a higher wage are basically teenagers. But the lowest skilled teenagers will be worse off. So another way to put it is that what you tend to see, and this is picking up that pattern, is that white teenagers might be benefiting, and black teenagers who have lower skills and worse education are going to be harmed. So you see a bigger gap in the unemployment of white teenagers and black teenagers. Right? That's just one way to pick it up. You can see it in comparisons of different age groups that this will distort the market, and the biggest harm will be on those with the lowest productivity, who are also the poorest. But the real harm is in the long term, because if you don't get work and experience when you're young, then you're going to have difficulty in 20 years to be making very much. Now, just to illustrate what can happen here, right, this is, if you look at, so I was saying you compare age groups. So this is the ratio of the employment to population rate. So that's the percentage of the population in that age group that has a job. Right? So that employment rate for 16 to 24-year-olds relative to that of 35 to 54-year-olds. All right? So the 16 to 24-year-olds are the least productive members of society. That was one of those insults you were talking about before. Too subtle? Too subtle? And commonly, the other age group, this is the prime age group, which I think you'll agree is appropriately named for another 3 years. Okay, so this is the ratio of the youngest employees or youngest potential employees to prime age employees, so people who should have relatively the highest wages. Right? They're working the most and have high productivity. Now so this is just what happens to this ratio over time. Now you'll notice it goes down over time for various reasons. So this is from 1978 till actually the beginning of this year. So it's a long-term downward trend. I'm not exactly sure what that is. I just have some social commentary that I'll withhold about why young people work less than they used to. But the key part is what happens at these lines here. These lines are times at which the minimum wage has been raised. Right? So since 1978, there were 10 increases in the minimum wage. Right? And they sometimes come in pairs or in groups of 3. Right? So yearly, or every 12 months here, there was an increase in the minimum wage. Then in the early 90s, another one, the middle of the 90s. And then here, in the middle of the worst recession since the Great Depression, they raised the minimum wage 3 times. Okay, if that sounds dumb, well, it was. Okay, but what I want to show is that at every time that they raised the minimum wage, there was a precipitous drop, almost every time, a precipitous drop in the ratio of young people who are working to prime age people who are working. Right? So here, there's this downward trend, so you have to be careful not to say everything that happens is due to minimum wage. But minimum wage goes in, there's a blip down. Another one, there's a sharp turn down. Another one, down. It's kind of going along, minimum wage, down. Another hike in minimum wage, down. Now in here, that didn't happen because the labor market was really booming in the 90s, so the minimum wage wasn't binding for a lot of people, so raising it didn't really matter very much. But you see during the last recession and before it, so even before the recession started, in the middle of 2006, the minimum wage went up and there was a big drop in the relative employment of young people, and then another big drop and another big drop. So it would go down anyway maybe because of the recession, but there were right at these points where the minimum wage was rising, and this is the month at which the minimum wage rose, you see, if you look carefully, a little bit sharper dip right there. Right? So what the minimum wage is doing is decreasing the relative employment of people 16 to 24. So it had actual real effects. Now, the overall effect on employment is a bit messier because, more of some other groups might be hired because of this. So it then gets very cloudy about the overall effects. But the comparison of the groups, it's that the lowest skilled people are going to be relatively worse off when you increase the minimum wage. And remember, it's low-income people or low-wage people who you're trying to help. And what you're doing is harming them and transferring opportunities to better off people. Okay? And it's not difficult to kind of see a pattern here, I don't think. All right? All right, so we make it illegal to hire low-skilled workers, but that's not too bad if they get an education anyway. Right? So they can't gain these skills and get a higher wage through experience because they're cut off from that. But instead, we'll give them education. So we have a system of free education in the United States where everyone of a certain age group does not only have the opportunity to go to school, but they're required to go to school. All right, so we have that route anyway, so maybe the minimum wage isn't such a bad thing because we can ameliorate its effects through education. All right, but the problem is that the way we have set up the public school system in the United States, it's a gigantic cartel that does a very, very poor job of educating people, but in particular a very, very bad job of educating low-income people. And the reason is an economist looks at this and sees, well, this is a cartel, and they've carved up the market to prevent competition, and they've segregated people into pockets of poverty and kept them by law from going and getting a good education. So think about how the US school system is set up, and think of if grocery markets were set up this way, or supermarkets. All right, so think of supermarkets. All the supermarket chains get together and they divide the United States into small zones. And when you live in a zone, you can only go to the supermarket. Well, if you go to the public supermarket in your zone, you get your food for free. Right? So your food is paid for with taxes if you go to the public supermarket in your zone. Right? If you cross the border to go into another public supermarket to try to buy food there, not only will you not be prevented, but you might be arrested. Right? So they're really enforcing these zones. Right? And it's free. If you go there, you pay through your taxes. All right. Also, you can go to a private supermarket. There could be a private supermarket, but when you go there, you have to pay out of pocket. Okay? But there are these zones set up, and you can only buy food. You get the free food only at your public supermarket. Okay, well, what's going to happen? Well, you pay a lot for food. Food is a very important commodity. So some people, actually everyone will want to, but some people will actually do it. You might move around to find the best supermarket. Right? You might move from one zone to another because the food is a lot better at that other supermarket. Right? Well, this will happen. Everyone who can move will move. And what happens is that some zones get full of rich people because the prices in the good supermarket zones for houses will be bid up. So poor people won't have access to those zones. And in fact, remember, you have police power to prevent them from coming into your supermarket. Right? So this is how the public school system is set up. It's a cartel that has carved up zones based on where you live, and because the more money you have, the more options you have to choose where to live, you find clusters of well-off people in school districts. And some school districts are much better than others, and other school districts are much worse than others, and they're the ones full of poor people, and rich people are living in really good school districts. Okay, so the result is the US public school system segregates poor and minority students in subpar schools. All right, now the other side of this is that not only is it a cartel providing public, K through 12 education, but the cartel is basically run by the employees of the cartel. All right, what if supermarket employees were running supermarkets and they had their little monopoly over some zone? Right? That's basically how teachers are involved in running the school. Right? And what if supermarket employees had tenure? Right? After 3 years of bagging, you can't be fired, no matter how bad you become at bagging. Also, a bagger makes the same amount as a butcher. Right? So a butcher who has more skills can't be paid any more because they're only paid by experience. Right? That's another thing that's common to public school teachers. Imagine if that was for other things like supermarkets. Well, you'd get very bad butchers, but you might get really, really good baggers. Right? So math teachers in public schools with 5 years experience don't get paid any more than music teachers because the math teachers have outside alternative, but they can't be paid more. Okay, so this was supermarkets, how good would the food be at the supermarket? It'd be pretty bad because there's no incentive or little incentive except maybe through some political process to get the supermarket to provide better food. Right? There's no competition or very little competition to get the supermarket to provide good food. The only mechanism is through some convoluted political process. Just like with public schools, the incentive to provide a good education is not that strong, and through the political process is the only push that you can give. And obviously in richer communities, there's a lot more political power that the residents can bring to bear than in poor communities. So you get school districts that are just very, very bad, like the city of St. Louis, and others that can be very, very good, like Ladue or Clayton schools, if you're from St. Louis. Right? And you can tell the difference in income by just looking at the house prices between, say, the Clayton School District, and right over the border is the city of St. Louis. You can have the identical house, probably worth 2.5 times in Clayton than it is 10 feet away in the city of St. Louis, and that's all because of the difference in school district. The housing price has been bid up to get into that school district, to get the free education. Okay, so the upshot of this is, and I don't think it's a mystery that public schools are not doing a very good job of educating, and in particular, the poor are the ones who are getting the worst deal out of this. But economists view it as just a cartel and a union problem. All right, so now what have we done? Remember, how we can get people out of poverty is to increase their productivity through wages, or through experience, and through education. Well, we've cut off the route of experience for the poorest, and we're not providing much in the way of education to the poorest. So we're in some way just not doing things to increase their well-being, but more importantly, we're doing things to harm them. So not only are we not benefiting them, that would be nice if we were doing no harm, we are actively harming poor people and making more of them. All right, so remember what I said, it's, well, ideally we want to increase these things to benefit poor people. We're doing the opposite, so we're harming them. All right, so the public school systems, people drop out and never get any education. The huge number of people in, say, the city of St. Louis who don't even have a 9th grade education. It's like 15–20% of the adult population. Okay, and also, even if they then want to work at some point, they're prohibited from a job because no one can pay them what their skills are worth. So we have a safety net. People who can't earn in the labor market what will keep them, make them be able to survive, we set up a welfare system to help them out. All right, and the problem with the US welfare system, you can say, all right, you have poor people, you want to help them somehow, whether it's government or whatever, let's accept for the time being that there might be a role for the government to do this. The problem is that the way the US welfare system is set up, and not just the US, this is a common thing, is that it works to trap people in poverty by penalizing work and rewarding dependency. I mean, there are some classic incentive problems in the welfare system, which you can understand why you want to have them in there. So, for example, your welfare payment or food stamp payment will be higher the more children you have. Right? So you might, if you're deciding this, you might say, well, someone with more children should get more money because they have more kids to support. So you think, okay, that's a good idea. But you have to think a little bit longer and say, okay, now you're increasing the incentive to have more children in order to get more benefit. So it's, yes, you want to help people if you just think, well, their behavior is not going to change or will not be affected by the system, but their behavior is affected by the incentives you put into the system, and you have to take that into account also. But this welfare system does a very, very bad job of recognizing the incentives that have been created and how people will react to it. So it will reward dependency and reward bad behavior in a lot of ways. But also it penalizes work. And then what does it mean when I say that it penalizes work? Well, I'm not going to go through all of this, but this is, and it's incredibly complicated to figure out how much someone is eligible for in terms of all of the programs out there, the welfare programs. So just some of the big ones. SNAP, that is Is that food stamps? Yeah. That's food stamps. It used to be called food stamps. Now it's, they called it something else. It sounds better than food stamps. But everyone, SNAP. TANF is temporary assistance, thank you. That's from the welfare reform in the 90s. And then you can get WIC, which is help for women with infants and children. You can get federal housing subsidies. CHIP, which is health insurance for children. The Earned Income Tax Credit, EITC. This Medicaid. And then you can get various tax credits and exchange subsidies. So these are subsidies for having family and so on. And you see here, this is when you earn money in the market, right? So someone who earns $40,000, so it's a single parent with 2 children in Colorado, right? So this is an example. Someone who earns $40,000 can get these levels of all of these programs, and then they can get this amount of benefit. So that person can get $10,000 of benefit if they're earning $40,000 in the market, is what that says. Right? And if you earn $100,000, you can get $4,000 or $5,000 in benefit. Right? So you might think, well, what the heck are all these people earning $100,000 getting this benefit for? That helps them to support giving it to others if they get it too, which kind of defeats the purpose. But all right, so you can get the child dependent care and so on. Now, the key part is what happens down here, because notice what goes on. Right? So this, if you just go to the top, this just adds everything up, all the parts. When you earn more in the market, your benefits from the welfare system fall. Okay, and that makes some sense. You know, you don't want to give all the money to people who are, you want poor people to get more than less poor people. All right, so as you increase your labor income, you'll get less in benefits from all of these different programs. And they all have their different incentives and so on. All right, now what that means is that when you decide to work and to earn more money in the market, if you're receiving a whole bunch of these benefits, you say, all right, I'll work an extra 10 hours a week or something. You take into account that, all right, I'll earn more, but I'll lose in benefits. So my net effect is the gain I have financially. Right? So what you hope is that you're going to be better off by working than if you don't work. All right, now what we call this is the effective marginal tax rate. It's the effect on your total income by working more, not just what you pay in taxes, but what you lose in benefits. So it's the effective marginal tax rate. So you can calculate that from all of these numbers here. All right, and this is using those benefits. And this blue line here, this is the effective marginal tax rate for these income levels when you're getting the things that are universal. Right? There are some things that are added on top of that, like housing assistance and so on, which you don't get automatically. But the blue line is the marginal tax rate if you're getting kind of the universal benefits. And the red dotted line is for the maximum. And that's what I had on the previous chart. This is if you're getting the maximum of all the possible programs. All right, so let's focus on the red dotted line here. This is if I earn an extra dollar by working, how much am I going to lose? Well, here, if you're not working any amount and you work and you earn up to $5,000, you lose 25% of that in benefits. All right, so you work and get $5,000, you lose 25% of that is $1,250. Just throwing it out there. It's about 50-50 whether it's right. All right, so when you go from 5,000 to 10,000, well, your marginal tax rate is about 45%. So that income rise from 5,000 to 10,000, you lose 45% of that. So 45% of that is something a little bit below $2,500 out of the $5,000. Right? So now you have to think, well, is it worth it to work if I'm going to work more, if I'm going to lose 45% of what I earn? Now keep in mind that at high income levels, the marginal tax rate, the federal tax rate is 39 point something percent. And these people are paying 40 some percent. All right, now look further, look up here. Right, the marginal tax rate for, this is around $20,000. If you're earning $20,000 or $19,999 and you earn another $5,000, you're going to lose about 96% of it in lost benefits. Okay, so what would you do? You have to work to get 4 cents on the dollar. All right, so in effect, your wage is 4 cents an hour, or 4% of what it would be. All right, and then this actually rises, and that's not an optical illusion. That is above 100%. There's a range here where the more you work, the poorer you become, because the effective marginal tax rate is over 100%. So if you work, you will be worse off, not just because of the disutility from working, but you will have less money because you were working. Right? And then because these programs are complicated, it does come down. But up to $40,000, the marginal tax rate is above 80%. So until you're earning $40,000 in the labor market, your marginal tax rate is above 80%. All right? Now notice at $80,000, this is mostly taxes, the marginal tax rate is over 50% when you count lost benefits and federal taxes. So the highest effective marginal tax rates, the highest real tax rates that people that are paid are at the low income levels, right? Between $20,000 and $40,000 a year. And some people will pay over 100% in marginal tax rates. Right, so remember what I said, it's that the welfare system is set up to trap people in poverty, because if you're in this range, there's not a lot of incentive to earn more money unless you're able to jump completely over that range. Right? Unless you're able to jump from 20,000 to 50,000. To get lower marginal tax rate, there's not much of a benefit, and maybe there's not one anyway, because you might have less money, but you won't have to work for it. So there are huge disincentives to work. So you're trying to help poor people by giving these benefits, but the way they're structured, you penalize them for trying to get off of the benefits. Now notice, you'd say, well, okay, that means there's no way you can do this to help people, and that's not completely true, because you'll notice here the EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit, this benefit actually rises the more money you earn up to some point. Up to $20,000, you actually get an increase in benefit the more you work, because you get a tax break. Right? So you work, so you get a subsidy somehow matching what you work. So there's an incentive to increase your work. And then that gradually tapers off. And this is an incomplete version of what Milton Friedman had proposed for many years, which is a negative income tax. Right? So instead of taxing you the more you earn at low income levels, you subsidize you the more you earn to get the incentive structure the opposite than what the system provides. So there are ways to deal with these problems nothing's going to be perfect, but there are better ways than having over 100% marginal tax rate. Okay, so let's go back and look at what I was going to talk about, the anti-poverty policies that we have, and then assess. Right? Minimum wage makes it illegal to hire low-skilled workers. benefits skilled workers and harms unskilled workers, prevents unskilled workers from gaining experience. Public education segregates poor and minority students in subpar schools, so you don't get much educational chances. Public schools are often run by the benefits of teachers and administrators, so obviously the public schools are not going to be providing as good a product as they could if there was more competition. And then the welfare system, which is designed to give a safety net to people, ends up trapping them. And even people who want to get out of this, the incentives are all not to try to get out, because you might have to work for a few years and give up benefits for years to get outside that trap from those effective marginal tax rates. All right? So let's assess these policies in terms of our simple logic of poverty reduction. Right? We agreed, it was simple logic. Public policies that provide education and work experience for the poor will help them out of poverty and into economic self-sufficiency. And remember, I said you could make the opposite statement. Public policies that provide less education and work experience for the poor will keep them in poverty and out of economic self-sufficiency. Okay, so the populist policies, and again, these are all very popular, and many people believe that they're helping the poor when the fact of the matter is that they're in many, many ways harming the very people that they are allegedly trying to help. Right, so back to my title, it's the plundering of poor people with populist policies. Right, so very popular policies. You talk to people who want more government involvement to help the poor. These are absolute demands. Well, obviously, raise the minimum wage. The wage is low. Well, pass a law, make it higher. Public education. Well, the education is free, I guess. And the welfare system. Well, we got to help them out, but at the same time, keeping them trapped. Now, there are cynical explanations about why this is all true. Some of them I abide to, like the minimum wage. Why is the minimum wage in place? Well, I think it's Milton Friedman said, well, it's an unholy alliance of do-gooders and trade unions. Right? So the people who are benefiting directly, right, a lot of kind of manual labor or skilled, slightly skilled or somewhat skilled people are benefiting and harming the lowest productivity people. Right? So they're benefiting, so they're cynically in favor of it. They're the special interest. And then there are the do-gooders who feel very good about themselves because they supported an increase in minimum wage and didn't want to, I guess, take the time to think an extra 2 or 3 minutes to figure out that it's not a magic wand that you can wave and fix everything by passing a law, that there might be other consequences. Okay, and public education is another, it's a sacred institution, can't be touched. And the welfare system, if you talk about how you can fix the welfare system to change the incentives, well, then you just really hate poor people. Okay? All right, so I guess that's it. I think it doesn't do a good job. So I think by the standards we set, by very simple logic, which again I said put you in probably the top 90% of policy thinkers in America, these do not really meet that standard all that well, to say the least. Okay, and that's what I have.